Welcome to The Fully Mindful, where we explore what it means to live with intention, creativity, authenticity, and connection. I'm your host, Melissa Chareau, mindfulness and breathwork facilitator, neurodivergent lawyer and coach, and fellow human navigating this wild and beautiful ride we call life. On this podcast, we dive deep with interviews featuring inspiring guests, share solo mini episodes packed with guided mindfulness practices to help you center and thrive, and mix things up with tangents and sidebars, where my friend and fellow podcaster Debbie Harrell from the New World Normal joins me for some real, random, and meaningful conversations. So if you're ready to pause, reflect, and expand, you're in the right place. Let's get fully mindful. Well, hello, everyone. This is Melissa Chareau with the Fully Mindful podcast. Joining us today is Michael Garden, a dynamic entrepreneur and coach. Michael's a 3-time entrepreneur and the creator of the Break community, where he inspires, supports, and coaches a community of over 14,000 to break work limits and build purposeful lives. With a background as a derivatives trader and a corporate innovator, Michael has reinvented his career a number of times. In 2018, he broke away from corporate dependence, which we're definitely going to talk about, scaling his side hustle into a $1 million business. He's the CEO of Rejoin Media and the voice behind the acclaimed Career Cloud Radio and the Break podcast. His work has been featured across various platforms, including Business Insider, Forbes, and the Huffington Post, some of my favorites. An advocate of remote work, yay for that, and work-life integration. He runs his businesses from the Midwest, balancing his professional pursuits with being a dedicated husband, father. Welcome, Michael.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This is going to be a lot of fun.
It's exciting to have you. I love having fellow podcasters. Always easy to have a good conversation with somebody else who's used to doing it this way. But tell us a little bit about you and how you got to be to where you are. Meaning, I know I just introduced you as having a number of different careers and that you've explored a lot of different interests. But what was it that ultimately drew you to where you are today?
Yeah, it's definitely not the typical path, right? It's very horizontal as opposed to narrow and vertical. I tell people all the time that I'm that kid that didn't know what he wanted to do when he grew up, and he still kind of doesn't. Part of that is ADHD. I actually was diagnosed very recently with that, and it explains a lot of kind of the horizontal mindset that I sort of have, and we can talk about that later. But really, I feel like my career has been all about figuring out how to actually align who I am with what I do. And that I feel like has been my deep drive to really get at the essence of who I am and how I can serve at the highest level, utilizing my unique talents, skills, and abilities fused with what I want to do. And I think a lot of us grapple with this, with trying to figure that out. And I have just, for whatever reason, maybe it's a higher pain tolerance, maybe it's a lot more ignorance than most people, but I've just taken a bunch of shots, basically.
Yeah.
And so coming out of college, I did what kind of everybody does that doesn't really have a grasp on what's going on. We go where the money is. So I went into finance and I said, okay, well, I like numbers and you can make a lot of money doing this. Maybe that's what I should do. And, school of hard knocks kind of hits you between the eyes and you realize that's not what life's really all about. And so another number of twists and turns, but I feel like right now where I'm at, especially going from 2018 to today, where I get to coach people through change, through uncertainty, and help them make big bets on themselves and take more control over their future. Like I feel that is where my sweet spot really is, because I've got a lot of history of trying to figure that out myself. Plus, I just have discovered this love for coaching and mentoring and helping people get the most out of themselves. And that also extends to my, 3 kids back here as well. And so I finally, at 43, I finally feel like I'm in a place where I have that really aligned. And now I can just start to really take a lot of whacks at the baseball in terms of trying to push that to the limit and serve as many people as I possibly can in the deepest
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was giggling to myself when you said, well, you know what, any normal college kid does, and they go where the money is, and I was like, ooh, that is not the choice that I made. I, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and so I went where I could easily get a job, which was in the service industry and hospitality, and that's where a lot of folks I know. So you were of the smarter variety. At least you made some money.
Well, you could say it's smarter. It could have possibly been a lot dumber, just because of, you don't know how what these effects are going to have on you. And maybe what I should have
Yeah.
said was what any type A, very driven, crazy kid who really thinks success is money,
Yeah. Yeah.
those types of people, that's what they do, is try to go into finance. And then, of course, I found out that's not actually what I want.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And I think that's what's so interesting about your story is all this self-discovery, this idea, because so many people will go for decades, their whole lives before they get to the point where like, wait, there's got to be more to this. And you kind of discovered it in stages, but
yeah.
a little bit earlier on than a lot of people do, which is fantastic. And I kind of wonder if in some ways, and we talked offline previously about this, that ADHD can be really difficult, and getting a diagnosis later in life like you did can really answer a lot of questions. And this is not to diminish anyone who has had difficulty with ADHD. I have ADHD and certainly many difficulties with it. But one of the benefits, perhaps, is this inner looking, this like, something's not right here. I'm itching for something else. There's got to be more to this. And I'm willing, i.e., also sometimes impulsive, to go somewhere else to try it out. Right. So do you think, now that you have this later in life diagnosis of ADHD, when you look through that lens, how does that explain the different stages of growth that you've had and your willingness to take a whack at the baseball a bunch of different times in different ways?
It explains a ton. I mean, it's so, it was very odd. I felt like to get diagnosed at 42, 43 years
Mhm.
old. But at the same time, it was very like liberating. And I
Yeah.
felt like it explained a lot of my behavior, my choices, the searching piece. And so I guess there's a number of ways we could go with this, but I guess from the standpoint of like the inner looking,
Hmm.
the way I had it described to me is ADD, ADHD, more the ADD part is really like um, you generally don't have a hard time with the big things, but like the smaller steps in the mundane, those things that you have to do, they don't rise to the level of you taking action because chemically, like they just aren't hitting that threshold. So
Right.
it explains a lot of like where I would always default to like, what is the biggest question? What is the deepest question? And spend so much time on strategy, so much time on what the inner workings, how things, as opposed to actually getting the thing done.
Right.
And so I feel like every time I had a question or I had a moment of discontent, it was like a full blown, all right, I got to spend the next 2 months figuring myself out and what I'm going to do
Right.
next.
Right.
And so from that standpoint, it was very difficult for me to stay focused and with a one track mentality. And so that's turns out is a blessing for me,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
because, all right, I'm not stuck in those ways that some people are. But at the same time, it was very difficult because it meant that I just looked at myself a lot differently. I think early on, I said, oh, everybody must struggle with this.
Mhm.
And then you see your friends and colleagues and people making career progress and doing things, kind of on that linear path. Like maybe they start to get ahead of you or they seem more focused
Right.
and they're getting promotions. And you're like, why am I having such a hard time with this? Like I feel dumb. I feel like I can't get
Mhm.
the things done that I need to get, quote unquote, need to get done.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of issues and, problems with that really up until recently. But I think it was always like okay, well, I just got to create my next new path. Like I have to create it as opposed to try to play this game that I'm like, I have a lot of anxiety about. I can't do this well, or at least I'm not winning. I don't have an advantage here. That's kind of how I think about it. And so I would just always default to sort of starting over. And maybe it's kind of that ignorance in me, but I was always sort of able to do that somehow.
Right.
Now, as I coach people through change, I have so many reps built up of forcing change on myself that it really comes in handy. And I can kind of be this beacon for people that is like, I am really scared to death of making a change, especially a big one, like changing my career trajectory or something.
Right.
And I can sort of like reason them through, but also be that example of like, I did this like 6 different times and I'm still living. Like I'm okay, you know?
Right. Yeah, it's that resiliency piece that you talk about. You know, you can demonstrate that to your clients and to, you know, other people who are interested in that. Like, yeah, you can, if you're a little bit flexible and you're willing to have a little bit of courage here, you are met with that resiliency. You know you can survive because you've done it 6 times. And maybe while it was difficult, like you were talking about, and I could totally relate to the some of the feelings that you talked about, like just not feeling smart enough or like feeling dumb and like, why can't I get this? But everybody else is getting it. And yet what you came away with is this experience of flexibility and adaptability and resiliency, which is just like exactly what you offer, right? To the people that you help, is how to go about having those characteristics, how to dive deep into themselves and have that adaptability, that flexibility, that resiliency, that mindfulness, that self-awareness. And so it's really interesting, right? Like sometimes our greatest difficulties turn out to be our greatest gifts, right?
100%. I had a friend of mine who's a kind of a LinkedIn social media goddess. She's awesome. Her name's Casey Jones. And she wrote something that was like, the thing that makes you most uncomfortable or vulnerable is what sets you apart. And you have to like, you know, lean into that. And I was like, it's perfect, because in this world today where we can literally do almost anything, like our limit is just unlimited, but everybody's clamoring for, you know, attention and all of this. It's like what cuts through, especially in the coaching world, what cuts through is just your authenticity, who you are, and your ability to lean into everything that you've overcome,
right?
Or has given you trouble that most people aren't willing to admit that they struggled with something like that, as easy as, getting the things done at work to get a promotion. Like, you know, there's so many people, 90% of people out there are like, yeah, like you go to work and you just get the things done. And I'm like, well, that was something I actually really had a hard time with. Sorry.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking about work that I've done, like a million folders, you know, what goes into what, how do I organize? How do I manage this thing? You know, and other people are just like, it seems like it comes naturally to them. Maybe they learned it too, but even if somebody taught it to me, it's just beyond my reach. My brain just isn't wired that way.
Me and project management systems, like, it's like, I can't do it. I've tried them all. I've tried getting things done system. Like I've done all of that stuff and my brain just explodes. Like I can't even hardly use a calendar, honestly. Like,
right.
Because I don't, I have to check it like 100 times a day, you know, like it's just weird. It's something that's foreign. And I'm like, wow, this is really basic stuff that I've been missing for 40 years of my life.
And you may never have. And like coming to some acceptance around that and knowing what your strengths are and what they aren't. And instead of judging ourselves about that and instead using some discernment, okay, this is not my forte, not my strength. I need to delegate these tasks to someone else so that I can do the things that I like to do and are the things that make me shine, right?
Yeah.
And then being honest about it, like you said, and being vulnerable. And so can you talk a little bit about that? Like when was the first time that you realized vulnerability was really a strength that you could lean into?
let's take a quick break.
Hey everybody, this is Melissa with the Fully Mindful. It's the new year, and I bet you're feeling the need to unlock your full potential and embrace empowerment, or maybe something completely different. Well, I'm excited to offer a new program with one-on-one breathwork and coaching sessions. We'll embark on a truly transformative journey of self-discovery, combining conscious, connected breathwork and embodiment coaching, and more. So contact me, Melissa, at the Fully Mindful, for your transformative session today.
That's a really good question. I think so. I've always kind of been into personal development and reading and all this stuff. And there's this guy, and I'm just blanking on his name right at the moment. And I'm sure it will come to me like at the end, but there was this guy 10 years ago. I'm reading his stuff, and he just described like his blog as bleeding on the page. That resonated with me. Like he had a lot of followers, a lot of readers. He was really interesting, quirky, had all these wild ideas. And now he has a podcast and everything. I'm just totally blanking on his name. ADD. There you go. But anyway, what he said about bleeding on the page made so much sense to me. It was like, all right, I feel this stuff inside. And yes, I'm a white man who has conceivably had all of these gifts and, had a fairly easy life. I've got great parents. They paid for college, everything. Right. But yeah, I've massively internally struggled with certain things. And I was like, oh, I don't have to put the mask up. I can sort of lean into that and bleed on the page as well. And then once you start to do it, and it was scary, but like I write a lot on LinkedIn and I talk about being fired and I talk about all sorts of stuff. Once you do that and you get the feedback, people reaching out to you and saying, man, like that, like it's really helpful. Like, thank you. Then it just makes me want to do it more because it's true. It's authentic. The mask is not. If I sit there and I try to say, oh, here's the top 10 things you need to do to change your career. And that's a mask. That's not authentic. But if I'm talking about my experience and the things I've done and how they've changed my life, particular moments that have changed the way I look at the world, like that's all really authentic. And again, I think that's the goal to me of life, period, is figuring out how to be the most authentic version of you and then create value for other people with that.
I think that's so important because, we have amazing tools, and I'm not saying don't use AI. ChatGPT is a good friend when you need it, but ChatGPT could write the 10 things you need to do to have a successful career, but ChatGPT cannot write what your experience was, right? And that's what people resonate with, and that's what people connect with is the real, human in us. And I know Brene Brown, I can't remember any of her quotes either, but she talks about that, right? That vulnerability really is our strength. We don't want to do it. It's terrifying, like you were saying. But yet when we do it, that's when we feel the real connection with another human being. And maybe in places where we weren't expecting to, right?
Totally.
I was thinking one of the first times that I lowered, I've certainly lowered my ADD neurodivergent mask that I've worn for many, many decades with close people. Like my husband knows exactly who I am. My daughter knows exactly who I am. But out there in the professional world, it can be really terrifying to be a little bit more vulnerable. And I remember the first time that I did it, my heart was just pounding, and I was getting into a little bit of, I won't say trouble at work, but there were some conversations that were being had. And I realized the mask was what was getting in the way. I had to pretend that I had all of my shit together, that I knew all of the answers. And that was actually what was getting in the way of me having additional success.
Hell yeah. That creates the conflict. That creates the inner conflict. And it has all of these ramifications for what you do outer wise. And that's why I say like the goal is authenticity. If you can get to that point where therapists talk about you just being comfortable with yourself, I think about it as that, but also figuring out how to actually use that as a strength and advantage to create value, because then you're just aligned and everything starts flowing. You're getting rid of all of the blockers, that mask, like that makes so much sense.
Yeah. And I remember, in my instance, when I decided to, as your blogger person that you can't remember their name, and we will figure it out at some point. The first time I bled on the page, it was in a work situation. I should say the first time I did it in a work situation, I was really nervous. Like I said, my heart was pounding. And then I expressed who I really was and what my concerns were and, what my fears were. And I didn't even wait for them to respond. I just felt incredible relief. Just my shoulders dropped. I just felt relieved. Like, this is just who I am, and I can accept whatever happens next. And they surprised the heck out of me, which is that they were very appreciative, understanding, and they were like, yes, that's who we want to see, that person right there.
Yeah.
And, total like blow me away moment, right? Because we think in this culture, especially in a professional setting, that we need to have all the answers, that we need to be the person who has no difficulties or challenges. And that's just simply a lie that our culture tells us.
Yeah, it's actually, so there's a few different words that I just can't stand in the English language. And I have obviously very pointed opinions on this, but I ban them basically. And expert is one of them. Like
expert.
The idea that everyone has to be an expert and show their expertise, and that is how we sort of like stack rank people.
Mm-hmm.
I write about it all the time. I am the anti-expert. It's one of the reasons I will not get certified as a coach. Some people want a certified coach, right? Like certified life or career coach or whatever. And I'm not going to do it because that is just letters at the end. And what I have to offer you is my experience. And I'm a different type of person and I serve a different niche of people. And that's authenticity for me. I'm not going around doing these types of things to show that I'm an expert in some field. It's to share what my experience is and talk about things that really matter. So the word expert in my vocabulary and with my kids is just banned.
And I mean, I think even I'll push back a little bit. There are some places like you want an expert, right? You want your surgeon to be an expert in the type of surgery they're performing. That said, you don't want them to be so much of an expert that they're closed off to new ideas. If there's a new way of doing something that somebody else came up with, you don't want them to be such an expert that they lack the willingness to look at new information that actually might be really helpful, right?
Right.
I think that's what you're getting at is, someone who's going to close off because they know all the answers, right?
Right, exactly.
And then if you communicate that in whatever world you're in, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're in a small business or a large corporation, if you communicate that you know all of the answers, it first feels good. People come to you, they want your expertise. But in the end, they kind of stop coming to you, right? Because you know it all. And so they can't add any value to the conversation. There can be no give and take. It just sort of throws up a wall, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's no other creative thinking that goes on in your organization then because they just default to you as the answer. It's just off-putting because you as a contributor, you feel like you have a unique take on certain things. And if it's just dismissed without any back and forth, right? Like there's no room for growth for people.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to have more of a beginner's mind, it seems to me, as the Buddhists might say.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about, I don't know, do you have any like early influences other than the bleed on the page guy? I mean, even back to childhood, anyone that you feel like you can point to where you're like, yeah, in retrospect, I mean, I think this is where I got this sort of flexibility, adaptability, mindfulness, self-awareness, resiliency. That's who inspired me.
Yeah. So James Altucher is the name of the author that I was trying to figure out.
Awesome. Good job.
I did a quick Google search.
Love Google.
Yeah. But so what's interesting, and I haven't figured out how this plays in other than just maybe naturally how I'm wired. I was obviously as a kid, a huge sports fan. I mean, I love football, basketball, and baseball, but my favorite players, and this is back in the 90s when people actually did this, were the guys that actually played 2 professional sports. So
Mm.
Bo Jackson, who played
Mhm.
football and baseball, and then Deion Sanders, who played football and baseball. For whatever reason, I just love the guys that did both, because
Yeah.
it's was unheard of back then to really do that, and it's even more unheard of now to do that. And my kids now, like, they're getting to the age where there's pressure to specialize,
Yes.
and I'm just resisting that so much. Is sort of anti my whole ethos. But so whatever, maybe that's just wired in me. And when I got into the professional world, I was in finance. So this idea of risk and how do you make decisions under uncertainty, and what is true uncertainty versus, it's sort of like the known unknowns versus the unknown unknowns. And
Hmm.
so I got deep into like Nassim Taleb, who is the author of The Black Swan. And
Yeah.
around the time of the great financial crisis, he was really popularized there. But his writings, he's kind of an abrasive personality, but his writings have really spoken to me and influenced me a lot. And they're infused in some of the things that I teach. I don't want to get too in the weeds on like math, but like, most people operate sort of on a standard bell curve where, again, if we're talking about investments, it's like, okay, I might have a tiny bit of high risk, a whole bunch of medium risk stocks and bonds, and then a small amount on the other side of just really safe cash. And his philosophy was kind of like, I don't want anything in the middle. I want like high risk where I know the downside. Basically, the downside is zero, or it's sort of an exponential growth thing. And then I want a ton of just really safe stuff. And his idea is in the middle, the stocks, the bonds, there's all of these hidden risks. There's all this interconnected stuff that nobody understands about how money moves and all of that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, that's really, really interesting. It's very counter to how portfolios are based. And I started taking that to my own personal life too. It's like, how do you get success, whatever that is to you? And not even on a money standpoint, but like, you should be taking shots. Like you should have the capacity in your life to be able to take shots in whatever direction you want, which means you're really, really safe. So that might mean you don't have a lot of expenses, right?
Hmm.
You keep your lifestyle low. You're really nimble. You got insurance, you've got cash, not just for a rainy day, but also to do the things that you want. And then the middle, which I would call career, there's a whole bunch of other things that would take up sort of like a middle risk profile from the
Hmm.
standpoint of the demands on your time,
Right.
and attention, right? Social media, like all of these things that people think is just fine, but it just sucks all of this time down the drain. And then have the capacity to be able to really take aggressive shots. And so that's kind of how we talk about getting somebody out of a corporate job, is like, we're trying to compress the demands of your job today and take some of that out of that middle belly, put that job on autopilot, get really safe on one end to set yourself
Mm.
up to have runway for whatever you're going to do, and then develop the mental capacity and time and space and energy to really take shots on the outside. So
I love
Taleb,
that as a metaphor. I never thought I would like a financial metaphor for life, but there it is. It makes a whole lot of sense. And, the thing that came to mind is, I don't know who it was, but, it's a Buddhist philosophy that they say, like, relax, everything's out of your control. And that often causes a
yes,
lot of consternation for people, like, what? But I mean, that's what you're talking about, is once we realize really all of it's basically out of our control, with the exception of, like you said, the very safe parts of life that we can manage. And even that is arguably out of control, but you have a lot more influence there to, like you said, have insurance, make sure you have money for your kids' college, for the mortgage payments, whether it's not financial or not, the things that you want to do in your life. And then you can, why not take the risk with, if you want to get out of your big corporate career and do something entrepreneurial, or, yeah, I mean, just do something completely different, then you are set up to take that risk and feel much better about doing it. Right. But
yeah,
the
and
truth is that risk is there anyway. So you might as well go for it.
right. So what's interesting is you start getting into conversation around the risks that are quantifiable or knowable and the risks
Mhm.
that you don't know. So if you take a risk and bet on yourself, let's say you decide to spend $5,000 on some program to get yourself some skill, right? And you're like, oh man, it's a lot of money and all this kind of stuff. But you really think, okay, but my downside is $5,000, I'm out, and whatever time I put in. If nothing comes from this, right? Like that's it. That's knowable. And then you can do an exercise where it's like, okay, well, if that happens, am I okay? Do I still have money in the bank? Am I going to make rent payments? All of those types of things. And you're like, okay, not that bad. Let's take it. But what people don't do is say, what? Okay, here's my life today. This is what it is. I have my job. I go to my job every day. We're unable to process the hidden risks within that track. We think that is known and safe and that is reality. But what we're missing is like whatever I want to do something, or it's the trade-off. Like I could be doing something else that gets me so much more happiness and fulfillment or time with my kids or whatever that may be. We just sort of take how we are and what our trajectory is as known. And we're unable to use our, I guess it's for lack of a better word, our imagination to really understand the downsides outside of that. And so I call that the unknown risks. So we try to surface those as well. And that way you can make a much better sort of logical cost benefit analysis. And so the idea is take your risk, make your future like a huge vision, because that's stacking the benefits of that path in one direction. And even if you don't hit your ideal version top, you're going to get to a place virtually guaranteed that is much better than where you are today. So stack those really high, make it grand, make it big, not in terms of necessarily monetary things, but full life. What do you want that to be? What is full to you? What is that? Make that super big and grand. And then all the fear around change can be sort of manipulated and quantified, and you can juxtapose it against that gigantic vision and be like, yeah, you know what? You can sort of get your brain to rationalize, yeah, I'm willing to give up some of this to get to that vision. And so I think about how do we use all of these means at our disposal to trick our logical brains that want to tell us no? How do we trick our brains into taking those types of steps for ourselves? It's interesting.
And it's so interesting because, I mean, I hear that. I think most people, even really successful, financially successful people, are in some sort of survival mode, right? This is the norm. This is what I do. I don't even want to scratch the surface to see what's underneath there or what could be possible in the future because I'm afraid, right? It's a lot of fear. I don't want to lose what I have. But in the not looking, we don't see what it is that we don't have at all, right? So we look at what we have. Oh, I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose this. But we don't look at what we don't have that we could have, right? And so what I hear you doing is inviting a process where you're actually taking a real inventory of what the person's particular career, let's say, is, where their life it really is, what's on the balance sheet. Sure, you've got, this on the positive side, but you probably haven't looked at the side that is negative. And where do you want to be? And so much of, I work with people as well, and it's sometimes really hard to help people see that they haven't looked at what it is that they want. I just had a conversation with someone the other day who was thinking about a career change. And she said, well, I'm thinking about whatever it was, the career that she was looking at. And she said, because I'm good at this, 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 and this. And I said, oh, that's really great that you're really good at it. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
And she just looked at me and she said, well, I just said I'm really good at all these things. And I said, yeah, but you haven't answered the question. What do you want? And people forget that actually matters. Right?
100%.
Sure, we have to pay the bills and we have to take care of our responsibilities, but it also matters. And it also matters, what do we want? And we may not be able to get there immediately. And that's the work that you do, is help people not only uncover what it is that's on the balance sheet, but also what it is they want to do, and also a plan that makes sense for how to get there. Right?
Yeah. So we lie to ourselves all the time. Right. We make up these stories all the time. And so here's an example. What I try to do is frame everything as an advantage in terms of advantage. So how do a skill that I have can be an advantage for me to use in my life, But if I don't love doing that, it's a disadvantage because I am spending so much mental time and energy forcing myself to do this thing that I don't want to do, that it's a disadvantage. So one of the things that happens a lot is with your question about what do you want? People say, oh, that's a bad question. Like, that's woo woo. That's baloney. I live in the real world. I have all of these obligations. I got to sacrifice for my kids. It's for my kids. It's, all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But when you do things that you want to do, you can stick with them longer. You can persevere more. You have more of a pathways thinking mentality. It's easier to do. You can do all of these things. So why not? One of your filters very logically should be, well, what do you want? Yeah. And then you have to go through a different series of questions to understand if that is really what you actually want. Also, whatever you're aiming.
Right. Or did culture tell you to want that? Or did your parents tell you to want that? Or did
we all because we all come out with a map of reality and what success looks like as teenagers or whatever that is. And that's how we start out. We're just sort of given this default. This is what success is. And you have to crack that code and you have to start listening inside. It's not your brain that's going to tell you what is success to you, actually. It's your heart, it's your feeling. And you have to be strong enough to actually listen to that in the face of whatever culture is if they're going the opposite way. You have to be strong enough to say, yeah, but you know what? Doesn't feel right for me. Okay. So how do I go explore what that means then?
Right. And for the people who have kids who, they say, oh, I can't because of the kids, et cetera. I mean, take a look around, right? That's what I usually say. When you look at some of your friends who are doing it for their kids, what's the impact? Because it's much easier to see when you're looking outside of yourself than possibly looking at what impact you might be having on your kids when you don't do what you want and you're toiling away at something that is sucking your soul dry, let's say, right? And you can see it in other people a little bit easier. You go, oh, right. I would want their kids to see that their mom, their dad are happy, right? Or fulfilled in some way. And does every day need to be rainbows and unicorns with the work that you do? No, but you should feel some sense of purpose, right? And you could get that in all sorts of different types of careers, right? You don't have to be an entrepreneur. You don't have to have a corporate job, but you could have. And you could be, I've heard many people who feel very much purpose-driven in what some other people might consider not purpose-driven jobs at all. It's all an individual choice. So for you, you finally found, it seems like, your purpose. At least that's where you are right now. And it sounds like you took a lot of different turns, different jobs, different ways of looking at things, trying different swings at different balls that you were hitting, but you're finally here. I mean, just so listeners, viewers can understand, what does it feel like when you've found your purpose?
Yeah, it's a great question. So number one, I think what's come very into focus for me is I do things based on how I feel versus some type of algorithm of costs and benefits or money, that type of thing. So in my younger years, I would make decisions all the time in terms of what pursuing this project or this business, like what does it pencil out to? Is it a big enough idea? That kind of thing. And today I'm doing things just based on like, do I think that, is it worth it that thing needs to be tried? So a couple examples. Number one is I invested with a doctor in building a new opioid addiction clinic model in my hometown, right? Big problem, not great solutions. This gentleman cared about it. It ultimately didn't work. Okay. But I didn't go into it being like, here's the numbers, here's what return I think. The question I asked myself was, does this just need to be tried? Okay. So that's one thing. And then another example is I did a small project with my kids over COVID. We built basically a journal to write down all the really funny stuff that gets said in our household. And it actually started with my wife and I way back when we were by ourselves before kids. We would start to write this stuff down just so we would have a record of all the funny things we did and could laugh about. And I always thought about it for 15 years, like, this would be a really cool product. I would give this to people for their wedding with a little
Mhm.
note, here's some wisdom and you guys should do this. But I never thought it was a big enough idea to actually make any money. And then COVID hits and I've got 3 kids and I'm like, you know what? This is just authentically me. I'm
Mhm.
just going to do it. And oh, by the way, I'm going to do it with my kids and show them this is like how you create a product, or this is how you can be an entrepreneur, right? This is an example of what to do. So does it make a bunch of money? No, it doesn't. But I take those books to the coffee shop where I work and I give them away to young parents. And I say, hey, my kids and I built this. I want you to have one. And it's just out there in the world. So pre
Right.
Mike was like, it's not big enough to do, work with my time. Mike today is do it because it's worthwhile and meaningful. So those are a couple examples of how it
Yeah.
feels. And then I'd say the other one is I really look out long term and I say, I know exactly where I know I'm on the right trajectory. The middle ground of how I do everything and how everything unfolds is questionable, but I know for a fact I'm going down the right path where I haven't really felt that way before. It's always
Mhm.
like, okay, am I going to be successful here monetarily, whatever? So along with that, it's like I'm doing something that I feel like I will never want to quit. I don't want to retire. I write about this on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
One of the retirement strategies that your financial advisor will never tell you is don't. And just build something that you would want to work on into your 90s. Like if I could be 90 years old, like 3 of my grandparents lived into their 90s. If I could be 90 years old and working and doing a Zoom thing where I am teaching, 40 somethings how to find life purpose, holy cow.
Yeah.
That's a fulfilling life. So those are a couple of things where I feel like, I guess examples maybe of the feeling of knowing you're on the right path.
The feeling of purpose and fulfillment. And,
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily have to end in what traditionally we might call success, but it is success, right? Because it is fulfilling to you.
Right. I think I'll just go back to this. Success is living your authentic path. I think an entrepreneur that created a $1 billion business, but was very unhappy and meant to be a cobbler, right?
Mhm.
That person's not successful. Monetarily, through society, yes, he is, but he didn't live his authentic path. And so you get to write what success is. You get to decide what that is. You don't leave it up to the default corporate model or society to tell you
Mhm.
what success is. You get to define it for yourself. And if you're living that, you start to feel good. You start to work on the process and enjoy the process of living and creating value and doing things and impacting people instead of thinking about the outcome, right? Retirement is the outcome.
Hmm.
I need to create and do and work and save so I can all of a sudden retire and live. And it's like, Jesus,
Yeah.
how about let's take some real thought and let's start to try to take steps to infuse more of life today as opposed to waiting for it. And again, you don't have to be an entrepreneur. You don't have to create there are many ways that you can create more freedom, self-direction, control, happiness. You don't have to be an entrepreneur, but you got to start. You got to
Right.
start living that self-directed life.
So for people who are listening to this and they're like, oh my God, this sounds so good, but I have no idea where to start. I do want to have more purpose, more meaning in the work that I do. I do want to feel more fulfilled. I do want to have more freedom. I mean, do you have any initial tips or suggestions that you can give people to put them on the right path so that they can start discovering what it is that they really want?
Yeah. So the first thing that has to happen is you have to create time and space
Mm.
to actually work on this stuff. So I was actually interviewed in the Wall Street Journal last year. And the title was called "Just Leave Me Alone So I Can Do My Job." And the whole article was about how to be left alone at work. So you could just
Mhm.
do your work without being distracted and with all this extra stuff, right? There's so much fake work that happens in jobs these days. So anyway, I was interviewed for this because the woman saw a post I did on LinkedIn. And so we talked for an hour and a half, but that has to be first. It's the first outcome in my program, but don't worry about joining my program. Just think about how you can start to create more space at work and at home. So start with meetings, right? We have all these optional meetings, start declining meetings. I have a little cheat sheet of how to say no to things, like a whole bunch of ways to just say no politely, to start pushing back. I teach people how to frame everything, every decision that you make around protecting your calendar as good for the company. So for instance, ways to push back on like, hey, there's 14 people in this meeting. You've asked me to come to this. My hourly rate is X and I have this priority. Would you rather me go to this meeting where I'm not going to add any value, or go put an hour into this project, right? Like there are ways that you can sort of frame nicely with your boss. You can start to set expectations around how you respond, which channels. Like we have a whole bunch of stuff that we teach around this, but that has to be first. And then at home too. I mean, 2018, I designed my way out of corporate work. I had 3 young kids at home, all under the age of 7. And I said to my wife, I said, hey, like, I really need to figure this out. What I need 2 hours, like every Saturday or Sunday morning. I'll do it early. I'll go to the coffee shop at 6 when they open, but I need 2 hours to just work on this. And it has to be protected and blocked out. And, she bought in and she supported me with that. And that was difficult, having 3 little ones and me gone for 2 hours. But those are the types of things that it has to start there. You have to start prioritizing the big things. I call it putting the big rocks in first. So if you have a jar, if you try to fill it with sand first and then the small rocks and then the big rocks, nothing fits. But if you put the big rocks in, then the sand filters all down and everything fits. So you have to put the big priorities in your life first. That's just it. There's no way around it. That's the first thing that has to happen.
Yeah, that's excellent. And so if people want to go further, tell us how they can, find you and the work that you do. Free, not free, doesn't matter. Just all the resources that are you and that you might recommend to somebody who's on this path and thinking, yeah, I'm ready to take this next step. My heart just doesn't feel right in what I'm doing. And I don't know what to do. I appreciate that I need to create time and space, but what else? So how can they, how can people find you? What do you have to offer? What else would you recommend?
Yeah. So the best place to start is on LinkedIn and just connect with me. Reach out. My DMs are open. You can say, Mike, heard you talking to Melissa, want to talk, start up a conversation with me there. So Michael Gardon, Gardon on LinkedIn. And then michaelgarden.com is where I have information around my program and my newsletter. So podcast newsletter, I put out a newsletter every week, all sorts of free tips like this, discussion around just life in general and how to create more intention in your work. I have coaching programs, which are, more on the end of like, I really need to make a change now. And then I do have a course, which I call Advantage Mapping, which works you through basically 8 areas that humans create advantage from. And you map out your life. You go get a whole bunch of feedback from people and colleagues about who you are, and you create an advantage stack. And that advantage stack for you is basically that foundation that you should feel really, really good about and really solid in. And then you can use that to sort of start ideating on pathways. Like, where could I go with this stack that is uniquely me, authentically me? And you can start to see like how I can create advantage in my life, whichever path that I take. But I think it's just so critical for people to find that foundation. And I don't feel like there's any really good tools out there. Yes, there are personality tests and things like that.
Sure.
But you can create advantage from a whole bunch of places. And a lot of it is, what do you want? What do you feel? What's your curiosities? Like all of that stuff inside that we just don't really talk about a whole lot. So I do have that on my website as well.
And I love that, because I was just thinking about that when you said the personality test. Like, you can take every single personality test there is out there and it doesn't get you any further, right? You have some understanding, oh, okay, I'm, an ENFJ or whatever I am. And that is That is really helpful information, but it's missing the piece that you just said, which was, and what do I want? And how do I want to feel? Right.
Exactly.
And yeah, so immerse yourself. I love that. Immerse yourself in this world, whether it's all of your materials. You have so many free materials that are really helpful. I mean, what I like about what you have to offer is you just offer valuable content, period. And then, yeah, if somebody wants to hop on with you and take a course or go with coaching, they can, but that's not why you're offering the content. There's this authenticity of you're offering the content to be helpful. And there's a lot of stuff out there that people can immerse themselves in like that. And immersing ourselves in this, in psychology, I think they call it like the pre-contemplation phase, right? You're sort of in this phase of, well, I feel like something's not right and I want to change. Just immerse yourself in this world, right? Go out there, read Michael's articles that you have out there, listen to some podcasts. And then when you feel like, okay, now I'm really ready, then you know where to go, right? Yeah. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you were hoping to talk about today?
Well, I guess I would just say we didn't talk a ton about really like mindfulness, meditation, visualization, some of these tools. And I guess I just want to remark on there's such a self-care wave going on. And I just want to say these are all tools. I don't think they solve the problem, but I use all of these tools immensely. They're necessary with a whole bunch of other action. But what's interesting is I heard, it was actually today, I heard, somebody said meditation is basically building your capacity to tolerate chaos. And I don't know that that's a great definition, but I loved it. I thought that was perfect. That makes a ton of sense. We live in a world that is just changing and evolving so rapidly that a lot of us feel like we're just spinning tops all the time. Well, if you can use something to help you tolerate that chaos, separate from it, start to use it to your advantage, that's worthwhile. And then we use a ton of visualization because you have to be connected to a grand vision of a future you. You have to be pulled towards that. And so this idea of visualizing not only what you want, but how it feels when it's already created, and doing that on a repetitive basis is literally reps. It's lifting weights, and it increases the odds that you are going to get to that state. And so people who think that's woo woo, people who think that's new age or whatever, and I'm sure most of your audience is like, no, we're good with that, Mike.
Yeah.
We're leaning into that. But a lot of corporate types that I talk to are on the opposite side. And you can talk all about the quantum stuff or whatever. But to me, it just logically makes sense. If you can rep yourself into to that state, it increases the odds that you get there. So why wouldn't we do that?
100%. And I mean, God, there's so much science out there and so many studies. And for those who are listening and not watching, Mike's got a basketball back there, like I think a baseball glove. He's clearly talked already about some famous sports people and loving sports. And that's, they don't think it's woo-woo. You ask one athlete, one professional athlete, what they do, and they will say they visualize what they do. And here's why. The science demonstrates that you will almost get the exact same results of doing the thing that you have visualized by just visualizing it.
Right.
Which is amazing, right?
Exactly.
It's like you are creating the neural pathways, and I'm not sure what else that might be woo-woo, who knows? But it works. It is, like you said, doing the reps. So they've shown that people who visualize shooting a successful basket, a three-pointer, are much more likely to then get the three-pointer when they go to actually shoot the basket, right? And it works for more than just sports. Of course, it works for all sorts of things. So a lot of people go, oh, I don't believe in that manifestation stuff. It's not that. It's just actually science and humanity, right? Working together. And when you do this stuff, it makes you feel good. You feel ready for when that opportunity does come your way. You've visualized it. You see how it's going to work out, and you feel comfortable in your own skin when you finally get that opportunity.
Right. And what you just said is probably the most underrated or underappreciated thing in the world. We don't need time management. We actually need energy management. Like we need to all be managing our energy and be really understanding of when we're up, when we're down, scheduling the right activities for the right times, trying to keep it up as much as we can, doing things that make us feel good because that has positive effects for people around us. Plus what we're doing, we're more engaged. It's an energy game. It's not a time game.
Oh, yeah, 100%. So, gosh, it's been such a great conversation. And I can't wait to have another conversation with you someday in the future because I want to see there's a lot more that we could talk about, especially on the mindfulness piece and the purpose piece. And I'm really interested in seeing the success of your different programs that you have. And I would love to be able to talk about them more and really appreciate your time and your energy to get back to that piece today. Really appreciate that you spent your energy with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I had a great time. I love talking about this stuff. So I'd be happy to do another one whenever I get the chance.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody, it's Melissa. And I'm wondering if you all can relate. Have you ever caught yourself procrastinating or maybe doubting your abilities? Or maybe you have a black belt inner critic like I do or have had that wants to sabotage your every move with judgment and perfectionism expectations. It might keep you stuck, it might keep you anxious and away from your full potential. The Positive Intelligence Program, PQ, is a powerful 6-week journey designed to help you quiet those saboteurs, embrace positivity, and find flow in your life. Through daily practices and weekly focuses, we'll work together to build your mental fitness. The PQ app will guide you every step of the way and support you, and you'll be supported either by myself in a one-on-one or in a small group of like-minded individuals where you can share insights and progress. So reach out, contact me at info@thefullymindful.com to find out how we can work together one-on-one or in a small group today.